I think my two previous colleagues have already said a lot about these issues. However, as they were talking, I was just thinking of two recent incidences. One was the recent suicide of the dean of UCT's medical school. And because he was a doctor, I guess he knew how to kill himself. And if he had asked for someone to assist him, that person, in terms of our current common law position, would have been charged with murder. And then last year, a daughter of a schoolmate of mine committed suicide at UCT last year by jumping at 6th floor or 8th floor because apparently she was suffering from depression. Now that's quite a horrific death. It was quite a shock to the system, and I went to the funeral as well. But if she had known about assisted suicide and it was legal, she would have chosen a much more easier way of dying than jumping 8th floor or 6th floor. Lastly, as I was reading the Strasham Fort judgment, I got a bit of a shock to discover that one of the senior counsels who was defending the Minister of Justice in this court, in the Supreme Court of Appeal, was actually 2 years behind me at law school. And her husband happens to be my friend. So I'm going to have a good chat with her when we get there. Now, how do I move this? A lot has been said, really, about this matter, the legalese and stuff like that. So I'll really not talk too much about that. But I'll start from the tail end in case I run out of time. To say, as the Human Rights Commission is concerned, let me say, well, first of all, the Human Rights Commission is a constitutional body which has been established to promote and protect human rights in this country. We also have a mandate to find appropriate redress where there has been human rights violations. Thirdly, we have a mandate to advise government on human rights issues, including changes in the laws. We also have a mandate to report our government to how it complies with its international human rights treaty obligations at the UN, where we as a commission also have speaking rights in the UN Human Rights Council. We also have the right to litigate in our name or on behalf of everybody else. And secondly, we have the right on our own to decide whether a conduct or a law is a violation of human rights or not, and act on it. We don't have to wait for anyone to come to us. So it is in this perspective then that at least the Secretariat, so the Commission has two parts. We have commissioners who are appointed by the President, and the CEO appointed by commissioners who runs the staff. So I head the Secretariat of the Human Rights Commission. So as a head of the Secretariat of the Human Rights Commission, our position is very clear, that the common law prohibition on assisted dying is a violation of human rights. And I've already instructed my staff members before I left here that they must actually prepare an opinion for us where we'll actually influence our leadership, that we must basically challenge this and get the courts to declare that these prohibitions on a matter of principle are a violation of human rights on a number of counts, but more importantly, human dignity, which I will talk about that. So that's our position. And we will work with any interested organization because in terms of Section 13 of the Human Rights Commission Act, we are mandated to work with human rights organizations in pursuit of human rights. Now, a lot has been said about dignity, and we think, as colleagues have said, that dignity matters. And if you look at the last point there, as Charles Colson said, that human right, dignity, and life go together. And as an African person, Ubuntu, there is no life without dignity. And if you take away dignity, there's no life. So we cannot say it's okay then for people to die in dignity, in indignity. When we say dignity is a very important right, it's a foundation of our rights. So I will not talk much about that. I'll skip the rest. Now, we have a very funny position in our country that suicide or attempted suicide are not a criminal offense in our country. And yet, assisted suicide, currently, it's a criminal offense under our common law, and it's an act of murder. Very funny. Now, clearly, as we were saying, these prohibitions are contrary to the right to dignity, as colleagues have pointed out in terms of Section 10 and Section 12, and also what the Constitutional Court said in Thipanyane, that dignity is a touchstone of the new political order. And therefore, if we continue to prohibit assisted suicide, which is basically to affirm the right of people to die in dignity, then clearly we are going against not only the Bill of Rights, but also the pronouncements of the Constitutional Court. It will be very interesting how the Constitutional Court will react to a challenge that these prohibitions actually undermine the right to dignity. And maybe they'll have to go back and see what they've been saying all this time about these issues. And of course, our famous Archbishop there, Tutu, says, this prohibition deprive dying people of the right to choose when and how they die. So my friend's daughter, unfortunately, did not have this choice and had to jump 6 floors in order to die. So you can see I'm already going beyond just assisted suicide. And of course, there are also issues of general attitudes towards euthanasia, informed by religious and cultural perspectives. This we will unpack a few slides down the line. But it's very clear that it is illogical to punish those who assist people in committing suicide and not punishing those who commit suicide or attempted suicide. Just from a philosophical point of view, it doesn't make any sense. But maybe there's something wrong with lawyers. And my colleague talked about what the judgment Willis said in the judgment there, to say, well, we cannot have euthanasia because of other challenges. Of course, that can be addressed with proper regulations, as we have said there. Now, the last point is what I really wanted to speak about in terms of culture. That here we have been told that, well, culture and religious views must be considered among some African people. It will not be proper for this kind of things to happen. That's really not quite true, and we'll talk to that later. So basically what we're saying is that, as I've said before, that the prohibition is a limitation, an unjustifiable limitation on the right of dignity for those who want to end their lives. And secondly, it will not even meet, as the colleague have said, the limitation clause criteria as to when actually you can limit human rights or not in our constitution, as my slide says there. Now, our view is that clearly there was the Law Commission bill. I sat in the Law Commission for 4 years. And by the time the bill became law, it was many, many years later. I'd even forgotten that actually I helped to draft the South African Child Justice Act after 4 years in there. That's how long it takes. And therefore, we think that the quickest way is that courts should be approached in order to develop common law in favor of the right to euthanasia, in favor of the right of every person in this country to choose when and how to die. Not even with doctors' permission. I agree with what the previous speaker was saying yesterday, that it does not just require doctors. Doctors cannot be the only ones who decide when I should die and when not to die. It's my right as an individual, it's in pursuit of my dignity. And that's what we're saying. Therefore, let's approach the courts to do this, because that's what happened under Thipanyane, when the ruling party and everybody else was scared to test whether the public would react, how the public would react to the abolishment of the death penalty. People went to court, and the court made a ruling. So if the courts could declare that the death penalty is unconstitutional, the courts can also declare that any prohibition on the right of euthanasia or the right of any person to kill themselves in pursuit of their dignity. It's a violation of the Constitution, full stop. Now, of course, we can also develop appropriate legislation thereafter in order to address this. Now, of course, bodies like the Human Rights Commission, challenge to us, should actually take up this fight for the dignity of terminally ill South Africans, and of course, anybody else who wants to exercise their right to dignity and choose when to die. You know, because to a large extent, these arguments, these discussions are around health issues. But we are told in our country, 24 South Africans commit suicide every day. So it's not just people who are medically challenged in the narrow sense. There are people who want to sign out. We have had enough. And of course, it's okay for them because it's not a crime. It's okay if they fail, but if you help your friend, then you're a criminal. I mean, that really has to come to an end. And therefore, I think my own organization should really play a bigger role in this regard. Now, one other issue which is not on my slides, which I was thinking about as a constitutional lawyer, that you see, governments or states are formed by people. There is no state without the people. So we choose when we become a state, when we become a government. Now, the state and the government cannot take away all my rights because I form the state. So I still have the right to choose when to die and when not to die. So these rules, like before, where in countries where if you commit suicide, it's a crime, is because now the state thinks they own you. That's why, in criminal case, we say the state versus so-and-so on behalf of the state. But I think the state has really taken these things a little bit too far. And therefore, we need to take back and make that understanding very clear, that we as individuals form governments, form societies. And therefore, we can never take away the rights of us to choose. And you cannot use culture or you cannot use religion to say, well, you cannot do that. I think that's really, I almost use a French word, but that's very clearly nonsense. And this is what we have to address as a country as well as a community. Now, on the issue of African cultures, I found the debate sometimes kind of interesting because culture does evolve. Many, many years ago, in our communities, they will kill one twin at birth to avoid succession battles. You might call it euthanasia, I don't know what. Many years ago, as somebody was saying, if I was to die, my brother will take over my wife as part of culture, as part of continuing the community. So clearly, culture does change. But what is important is the individual. So we cannot use culture in our country. And the reference which Judge Wallis made about African culture not being supportive of this, it's really a lack of education and understanding of what culture is. But secondly, I come from a very staunch Christian background. And I was speaking to my dad to say, you know what, I'm coming down here to talk about these things, and what's your view? No, Chief, this goes against the word of God. I said, wow, okay. Now, what about people who are in pain? You are suffering from cancer. What should happen? No, God should decide. And I think, you see, religion and culture have been used by other people for their own agendas. And now they're using the very same culture and religion to deny us of our right to dignity. So in 1776, when the Declaration of Independence was drafted, saying human beings are endowed with human rights, and they have the right to form governments and remove those governments when they're longer desirable. That was quite amazing. But in the name of culture and religion, they left out black people, and they left out white women until 100 years later when they allowed white women to vote. In my country, when Jan van Riebeeck came in 1652 and colonized our people and imposed Western law, we were oppressed, that's fine. But guess what? Up until 1988, white women were perpetual minors under our law. And up until recently, in the 90s, a white woman, even a black woman, could be raped if they were married. So this is how we use culture and religion to construct a narrative which suits us. And so this constructed narrative that religion and culture will not support the right of anyone to choose when to die or not is actually nonsense. Thank you.